Good morning and welcome to the first session of the fourth Wellness Summit, Coping with Pandemic Stress and Tips for Self-Care. 3 years ago, we lost a young woman in our community to suicide. When Sarah died, our community was shaken. The Siegel JCC, Jewish Family Services, and Jewish Federation of Delaware came together and created the first Wellness Summit. The community was invited to grieve, mourn, listen, learn, and just be together. We decided to continue this vital conversation and work to destigmatize mental illness and encourage healthy dialogue to prevent anyone from feeling like they are alone. My name is Rachel Harrod, and I will be moderating this session. I am thrilled to be here because mental health has been a difficult and important topic in my family's life. My hope is for everyone to have access to the mental health support that we each deserve. I am so proud to be an active member of the Wellness Summit Committee since its inception and a member of JFS's staff. Please feel free to ask questions. Click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. During the talk, I will ask Annie your questions as she is ready to answer them. If we cannot get to all of the questions, we will be posting answers after the session. Annie Slease, Director of Advocacy and Education for the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Delaware, joins us today. Annie has held this position at NAMI for over 3 years. She received her Master of Education from the University of Delaware in 2003. Annie is an author, educator, advocate, and highly sought-after speaker on mental health awareness, gun violence prevention, and school safety. We are honored to have her here today. Please welcome Annie Slease.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Rachel, I'm just going to share my screen. And please, to reiterate, this is a session that we're calling Let's Talk. So we really want to make this an interactive experience. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. And Rachel, please just interrupt me if you see a question that you think is timely that we should just stop and address. Otherwise, there will be a few places throughout the presentation where we can stop and have a discussion. So we're talking about coping with pandemic stress and tips for self-care. We'll start off with a bit of an introduction. Then we'll talk about stress and its impact on us, as well as coping during COVID. We'll look at the concept of self-care, what that looks like, how we can practice it, and perhaps come up with some strategies. And then we're going to look at some resources. I'd like to introduce you to the idea of NAMI because sometimes that we hear NAMI and we hear NAMI Delaware and we think they're the same thing. So I work for NAMI Delaware, which is the state agency that was founded in 1983. However, NAMI is our nation's largest grassroots mental health organization, and it's been around for over 40 years. It was actually founded by two moms in Madison, Wisconsin, who were each caregivers for their adult sons living with serious and persistent mental illness. And their experience navigating that mental health care system was fraught with barriers and stigma, and it was just really difficult. So they turned to each other and they gathered around other community members who were experiencing similar things. And they wanted to support each other and educate each other and the general community. And that's how NAMI was born. So there is a NAMI in every state. And in NAMI Delaware is focused obviously on the state of Delaware. So we have the authorization to use NAMI national programs, but we can also customize services and presentations and programs to serve the Delaware community. And today's presentation, I should say, is an example of that. So our mission is to support, educate, and advocate until there's a cure for severe and persistent mental illness. One thing that's notable about NAMI Delaware that's unusual is we offer a robust housing program. We provide housing for about 300 individuals living with serious and persistent mental illness each year. And most NAMIs do not have a housing program, so that sort of sets us apart. And it's another example of how each NAMI serves its community uniquely. So if you're in Delaware, you know you can reach out to us. But if you're outside of Delaware or you have loved ones in another state, do know that there is a NAMI in their state as well. Just go to NAMI.org and you can find other local NAMIs. So you heard a little bit about my background, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things that I think might be relevant in our discussion today. My background is actually not in mental health. I was a classroom teacher for 25 years, mostly teaching English, mostly directing musicals in middle school and high school. I thought that's what I would always do. I'm also the mother of 2 sons, and this is a photo of us together about 10 years ago. My older son lives with serious and persistent mental illness, and the photo I'm sharing with you today took place right about the time his illness began. And I think it's important for you to look at those smiles. Look at our faces. It looks like everything's fine, but it wasn't. You see, when mental illness affects a family, oftentimes people feel alone. And if they don't have support and information, they might not share with others what's going on. And that was really what was going on with us. My older son and my younger son today, 10 years later, are glad that I'm sharing our story with others because they understand the impact that mental health has on a family if mental health concerns are not addressed. Briefly, I'll tell you that as an educator, I was prepared in the classroom, but I was not prepared to recognize warning signs and identify them in my own child. And for my son, he also had no idea what mental health conditions are, and he didn't know they were treatable, and he didn't know that they weren't something he should be ashamed of. So without information and support, our family really spiraled. And it was when I found NAMI that things turned around. And understanding the impacts of not only a mental health condition, but also the stressors that surround a family is really important. And I think it holds true today when we're looking at what's going on. First of all, please know you're not alone. We're all enduring stress right now. In fact, this slide illustrates just how challenging Americans are finding themselves right now, challenging they're finding the world. 40% of United States adults are reporting challenges with mental health conditions or mental health symptoms and substance use problems. That is up significantly from the typical numbers that we see. Pre-pandemic, NAMI reports that 1 in 5 lives with a mental health condition. So that is a significant jump from that. This summer, about 31% of US adults are reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression. They're reporting about 26% are reporting symptoms related to trauma. So trauma, I should say, is not a mental health condition. Trauma is an experience. However, trauma is a risk factor for developing a mental health problem. And some people who feel the impacts of trauma for a length of time and are unable to address that impact may develop a mental health condition. And some of those disorders may be related. So they might be called stressor related disorders, something like PTSD, perhaps you've heard of. 13% of US adults are reporting that they've either started using substances as a result of the current issues in our world, or they've increased their usage. And 11% of US adults this summer reported seriously considering suicide. We need to recognize that right now we are all going through something we'd never expected and something we have to help each other get through. So keep in mind that you're not alone. That is the motto of NAMI. And I have to tell you from a personal perspective, knowing I'm not alone made a huge difference in my own family's challenges 10 years ago. And it continues to help us now. So let's take a look at what stress is really and how it affects us in general, not necessarily specific to the pandemic. But stress is something we've all experienced. We are familiar with it, right? And sometimes stress can actually help us. In some cases, stress can help us get through a dangerous situation, for example. The challenge, though, is if we endure long term stress, it can have really harmful impacts on our health. And in my family, I can tell you that the impacts of my son's illness, coupled with the fact that we didn't have support and we didn't have information, really impacted us all on some level. And me, for example, I definitely felt the health impact. I had chronic pain and I had other health symptoms that I didn't at first connect to the stressors that I was experiencing within my home. There is an analogy developed by Brabin and Turkington in 2002 called the stress vulnerability bucket. And there's actually a great video available on YouTube from brave.com. And I believe that we'll be sharing that in the chat. But I'm going to just show you some screenshots from the video for now. And I'd like to talk you through it to kind of get a visual of how stress affects us. So the first thing to think about is this bucket relates to how we manage stress. It actually connects to our stress tolerance. So if you can imagine, we all have a bucket, and the size of your bucket and the size of my bucket varies, right? So my bucket is dependent upon my genetics, my personality, my life experiences, and your bucket is yours uniquely as well. Now, the stressors that we all experience, that can be compared to water. So thinking about the water entering our bucket can be the same idea as the stressors that we're going through. Now, we don't want our bucket to overflow, right? So we want to enable some mechanism to let that water out, to release it. And so think about a tap, just like in these images here. And the taps can be the coping strategies that we're using to help alleviate our stress. Whatever coping strategies we know, whatever we have available, we will use to help alleviate the water, help drain it so that we don't overflow. So this image shows us some of the stressors that we all experience. Things like work and school and relationships and finances, moving, the loss of a loved one. These can all impact our bucket. These can all bring water into our bucket, just like this image shows. And you can see the taps are working hard to release that water. We have to find ways to alleviate the water so that we don't overflow. Now, this image shows two kinds of taps. The ones at the bottom allow the water to go for good. But the ones at the top, you can see those taps are bringing the water right back in. That's what we have to be careful of. Taps or coping strategies that really are just temporary. Things that we might be doing that feel like they're alleviating our stress, but really they're bringing it all back in. They might even be making things worse. So what I'd like you to think about throughout our conversation is your bucket and how you can practice coping strategies that are healthy, that help release your stress or release your water from your bucket, but release it so that it doesn't keep coming back. I hope that image was helpful to you. Do you think that helps kind of visualize how we can manage our stress, especially these days? If you have anything you'd like to share in your chat or a question, this would be a great time to stop and have a quick conversation. Rachel, feel free to fill me in on any chat questions there might be.
Okay, so Annie, so far we had a question about NAMI Delaware programs.
Okay.
Kathy asked if there is a program available specifically to support adult siblings of those with persistent severe mental illness.
Great. Okay, so NAMI's philosophy is that they sort of serve people in two life experiences. One would be as a peer. So that would mean someone who identifies as having a mental illness. And then the other would be as a family or loved one. So kind of through the perspective of caring for someone with a mental illness. So I think that second category would address what you're thinking about. We do have support groups for family and loved ones. And while those who attend that family support group may not all identify as siblings, they all have shared experiences as having someone in their life that they're very close to who's experiencing a mental illness, and that caregiver experience is sort of universal. So hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions or anything related to maybe the bucket analogy?
Christy said it was a great analogy with the bucket and water, and she's unable to use the chat.
Oh,
So yes, we did disable the chat, but we'll be
oh,
using the
okay. I'm
Q&A
sorry.
function.
Oh, the
Uh,
Q&A. Sorry.
and then we had another question that related to the elections, and if you're going to
Mm.
address election stress along with the pandemic.
I'm
So
not going
that
to
was asked by,
specifically go into politics, but absolutely some of the things that we'll talk about will apply. Absolutely. Yeah. We have to look at this 2020 as a whole, right? And look at all the things that are impacting us. As a matter of fact, that's where we're going next with our conversation. So Rachel, are we ready to move on?
I
Or
think we're ready to move on. Thank
okay,
you.
great. So let's take a look at some of these questions that might fit you, okay? So have you felt worried about your health related to COVID, either the health of you or someone that you care about? Have you felt concerned about your employment, or has your work experience changed? Either have you been furloughed, or has your work moved to be remote and now you're working at home? Lots of different things can be impacted related to employment. How about social issues? Have you felt distress about about issues in today's society? Some of those might relate to politics, as you were mentioning earlier, the election. Some of those might relate to racial injustice, to the disparities that are being brought to light, to social justice issues. And you might feel like, gosh, I don't have control over this. This is overwhelming. If you have children at home and they're in school, that might be adding to the complexities in your household. School age children absolutely need us, right? But today it looks a little different. They might be going to school from home. They might be in a different room at a computer where you're working in one room and they're working in the other, and you're managing both. And here's the thing. Any of the things that we've listed here, and certainly others as well, can be impacting your level of stress. But if you've focused so much on the needs of those around you and you haven't addressed your own needs, that itself adds a great deal of impact to your stress. What I'd like to do now is take a look at some of the symptoms that we might be feeling if we're feeling stress. But first, before I do, I want to remind you of something that you may have seen in that beginning slide at the beginning of our session today. That if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling thoughts of harm or overwhelming sadness or anxiety, we want you to feel like you can reach out now. There are multiple ways to do that, but there are a couple here on this slide. It's very important that you address your own needs. And if those feelings of overwhelm come up now, I want you to stop and I want you to reach out, either using the Delaware Hope Line or texting the National Crisis Line. You can certainly call 911 as well. We want you to take care of yourself. You're important to us. You matter. Now, here are some symptoms that you might be feeling or you might be recognizing in others. And they might not directly feel like they're connected to stress. So things like concentration, nervousness, sleep, irritability, burnout. Um, these are lack of motivation. These are possible signs of stress. And some things can become physical. For example, perhaps you're feeling headaches a lot and you can't understand that because it's not something you typically have. You can even actually have sore muscles, and that can be related to stress. Maybe you didn't do anything to injure yourself, but suddenly you have this overwhelming pain, chronic pain, as a matter of fact. You might be having trouble in your relationships. That can be connected to the stressors on you. Maybe you're having digestive problems. Again, you could think about, what did I have for dinner last night that upset my stomach? But if it keeps happening over and over again, perhaps it's not your diet. Perhaps it's stress. What we can do about our stress is practice self-care. Now, I shared a little bit about my story before, but I want to go back to that for just a moment, because I do remember 10 years ago when that was happening in my family. There were a few people who they didn't know what was going on, certainly because I wasn't going to share that, but they did say, "Gosh, are you okay? Do you need a day off? Is everything okay? Maybe would you like to go and I don't know, maybe I was invited to go places." I just remember having these opportunities being posed to me. And every time those things that seemed inviting, they seemed too frivolous to me. They seemed almost selfish. And I remember thinking, I can't do that. I don't have time for that. I have things I have to do. Well, I wasn't practicing self care. I didn't recognize that self care, as a matter of fact, will help me be more available to those who need me. And so let's look at what self care is, because I don't want you to fall into that trap that I fell into. Self care is really engaging in activities that allow you to maintain an optimal level of wellness. Or another way of saying it is listening to what your body and your mind need and acting accordingly, rather than just pushing through and continuing to endure ongoing distress, pain, uh, irritability, any of those things. Stopping and listening to your own needs. That's self-care. And there are lots of benefits to self-care. You'll get more energy. And that seems a little counterintuitive, right? If you're super drained and you feel burnout, the last thing you want to do is go do something, right? Go for a run or go do some exercise. But actually, when you practice self-care, you actually rejuvenate and you get more energy. Your stress certainly goes down, but you also can actually improve the resistance you have to disease. You can keep yourself more healthier just by practicing self-care. You'll be more productive. So taking time away from producing work or doing tasks actually, again, feels counterintuitive, but actually allows you to come back and do those tasks better than you did before. You're also going to find that your relationships are stronger. You care about yourself better. You have that self compassion that is so critical, and you're sleeping better. And frankly, you're going to have more to give to those who need you. So let's take another minute and think about this. Thinking about that sense I had that I shared with you that I was being selfish. Does that make sense to you? And have you ever felt that way? And then in addition, are there things that we might be doing or thinking about doing that feel like self-care, but they really might be those false taps that we had in the bucket, the ones that leave the bucket but come right back in? Are there things that we might be doing or thinking about doing that really may cause more harm in the long term than than we intend? So let's open it up to any questions or comments at that point. And Rachel, please let me know if there's anything.
Okay, so we had a question regarding the bucket
Hmm.
analogy, which this anonymous attendee said was great. And she wrote or he wrote, but like with a real tap, over time it can become corroded and need
Ah,
improvement or replacement. How do you suggest ways to identify when we need to upgrade, outdated taps?
what a fabulous question. I love that. We should definitely send that out to the brave.com folks too, so they can add a quick extra part to their video because I love that. So I guess the idea you're asking is, how do we know when the self-care that we're practicing isn't working anymore, right? How do we know that even though I keep doing this thing people are telling me to do, I'm not feeling any better, or it's just not working anymore? We're actually going to address that in a little while. And really the idea is to be self-aware, to take the time to listen and hone in on your own self-awareness. And that's hard to do, especially in times where we feel so busy and we feel so distracted by all these things. But knowing that there are 8 dimensions of wellness, which we're going to look at in just a minute, maybe that would be a way to try a new tap, looking at those different dimensions and different aspects of our wellness that we could address. Thank you. What a terrific question. Is there anything else, Rachel, that we can look at before we keep going?
Right now, we don't have any other Q&A, but I was going to say that, I mean, some of the negative things that I do that I think are positive are going for the extra comfort foods and
Mhm.
drinking maybe an extra glass of wine. And I know they make me feel better for a minute or two, and then
Right.
I feel terrible afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think we can all relate to that. That indulgence that might feel good at the moment, but really ends up making us feel worse later. So these are just some examples of some things that we might be doing that actually can be self tap, or that can actually be false taps, or bringing that water right back in. Some people may be engaging in more substance use. We saw that in that slide. I think it was 13% of US adults are using substances more than they used to, or they've started using them as a response to the stressors that they're under. People might be eating differently, whether that's eating too much or eating too little. That's actually an important aspect of our health that we need to be addressing. People might be pulling away and withdrawing. And while there's nothing wrong with taking a little time out for yourself, and it may feel like that's what you need, we also need people. Humans actually need people. That is a fact. So if we're pulling away so much that we are having trouble reconnecting, then we might have gone too far with that, and that may have become a false tap. And certainly, I think for many of us, ordering things online and spending too much money might be a temptation. Certainly, with the options like Amazon available to us, we might. And there's nothing wrong with placing orders online. Don't get me wrong. But when we're spending money we don't need to spend, we don't have, or when we're buying things simply to fill a need that we're having, a yearning, almost like what we were talking about earlier about having that extra glass of wine or having that extra snack. It's filling a need that isn't really being resolved. If we're buying something, we're buying it because we need it rather than because we want to shop, right? So these are all ways that we can address sort of negative self-care strategies. Healthy self-care might look something like this. And these are just examples. Of course, there are lots of other ways that we can be addressing our self-care, but taking a chance or taking a look at our physical body and getting out and moving is important, especially even when, I should say, when it's cold out or when it's raining. That doesn't mean we can't go outside. Get an umbrella, get a coat, right? Something about fresh air really makes a difference. And when sun is shining, getting some sun is really important. Just letting ourselves absorb some vitamin D. Thinking about our diet, our sleep, and reflection. If you've ever kept a journal, maybe you found benefit in that. Not only to looking forward to or planning things and writing about those, but then also reflecting back on what you've written. There can be great benefit in that. And certainly socializing, I shared with you earlier, it's important. Humans need humans. Even today, during the virtual times we're in, we can still socialize. We can either go outside and socially distance or physically distance, as some prefer, and see people that way, or we can just do things like this and Zoom. And it's not the same, of course, but it's important that we connect. And if you've ever heard of this, forest bathing, it's kind of cool. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining it, but it's something I recommend that you look up if you like to be outdoors. It's really a concept, but this image that says get outdoors, it reminds me of the concept of forest bathing, and it's another opportunity for self-care. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are 8 dimensions of wellness. So SAMHSA recognizes these 8 dimensions, and while some of these may seem kind of obvious, let's take a look at some that might not be so obvious. For example, occupational wellness. That means that we're taking care of ourselves in the occupations that we have or in the work that we do. We're ending our workday and closing the email, right? I had a terrible time with that as a teacher. I was constantly responding to emails that families would send to me, and it made sense because families were coming home from their workday and checking in with their children and reaching out to their children's teacher, i.e. me, off off hours, right? Because they were finished with their workday. But I was responding. So my workday kept extending. Now, that was no one's fault. I wasn't told to do that. It was my fault, I guess. I wasn't told to do that. I just did it because I felt like they needed me and I felt like I should respond. So that's an example of how I wasn't taking care of my occupational wellness. I needed to stop my workday, put my phone down, disconnect the notifications from email so that I could address my home life in with the same energy and focus as I was with my work life. Another aspect of wellness that's interesting is intellectual wellness. So a colleague of mine is learning a new language now during the pandemic. How cool is that? I don't know if they're intending to travel or anything like that, but that is their focus, and they are um, really fleshing out their intellectual wellness in a new way. Consider something like that. And that question we got earlier about the taps would be ideas of new taps, right? New ways to explore your wellness. Now, we can practice self care. We can do all the things that are recommended here, and we still may be struggling. Now, I want you to know that's okay. 10 years ago, when my family was struggling, I didn't know that was okay. In fact, I thought it was a flaw. I thought it was a flaw in me as a mom. My son thought it was a flaw in him as a strong kid. But the fact is, it's not true. Sometimes we feel the impact of a mental health problem that we can't resolve on our own. But just like another kind of health problem, a physical health problem, there are professionals who can help. There are professionals with the training that we don't have as general community members to resolve these conditions. And the thing is, mental health challenges are real and they're treatable. So if we think that we've practiced self care and we've done all these things and we still don't feel well, we need to not look at ourselves with judgment. We need to look at ourselves with hope, and we need to reach out to a professional who can help. The way we can gauge whether or not it's time might be looking at the impact, the level of impact. How much is this feeling I'm having affecting everything else in my life? So I shared with you our story, and during that struggle, I was maintaining my work life. I was teaching every day, I was showing up. But you know what? I really wasn't showing up. I wasn't the best teacher I could have been. I wasn't the best mom I could have been. I wasn't the best friend I could have been. I thought I'd been. I thought I had. But looking back, I know I wasn't because I was breaking inside and I wasn't reaching out for help. Eventually, I did. And it made all the difference. And that's actually when I found NAMI. That's when I talked to a therapist and learned more about how I can help myself, how I can help my son, how I can help my family. So I really want you to consider the impact that you're feeling with regard to these stressors. And if that impact is um, so much affecting different aspects of your life that you don't feel like you can do this by yourself, don't. Reach out for help because there are professionals who can help. What kind of barriers do you think people face when they're thinking about reaching out for help? Does anybody have any ideas about that?
So Annie, we got a great question.
Okay,
It's actually a double question.
like a
Uh,
two-parter.
Not
Okay.
exactly a question. It's more of I think we're all worried about this and concerned. So Bridget wrote, I appreciate this so much, but I feel it is geared towards people who trust mental health. Is
Mm,
Delaware planning ways to address barriers to mental health with
yep.
racial injustice and such, where some groups may not trust the system? And then her follow-up is, I'm also curious about Delaware's response to the call for social workers and mental health professionals to be a part of police reform. When we look at stages of change, we see people and families suffering with mental illness or substance abuse. And when an adult is in early stages of change, resistant to engaging in mental health treatment, and the adult remains a danger to self or others, what can we do here in Delaware? Even crisis services are voluntary for adults, right?
Yeah. So, wow. Thank you.
Big question.
What was this person's name? I want to thank them by
Bridget.
name. Bridget. Thank you, Bridget. You brought up some really important points, and I would love to talk to you about advocacy with NAMI Delaware. So, email me. But to address your questions, yes. I can't speak for the state. NAMI Delaware is an independent nonprofit agency, and we do not work for the state, but we work with the state, and we are discussing at length these issues that you've brought up. We do see the criminal justice reform piece, and certainly NAMI Delaware works a lot around that area. We're the agency who helps coordinate the crisis intervention team services for law enforcement. So we've trained hundreds of Delaware law enforcement professionals, and we continue to work with law enforcement so that they understand how to respond to a mental health crisis appropriately. When it comes to the racial justice issues that you mentioned, and the fact that some communities and some individuals may be less open to reaching out for help or to connecting, that makes sense, and it's a very important aspect of the work that we do. I'm actually going to lean into some barriers to treatment conversation coming up, but when it comes to specific communities, we are addressing disparities, and we're addressing stigma as they impact different communities as much as we can. We have some programs focused specifically on communities of color, and we have volunteers working with us to put together programs and materials in order to help break down the stigma and to address other issues related. So, right, like professionals addressing mental health concerns with cultural humility, right? That's another issue that we need to work on. And we're certainly having those conversations. But again, Bridget, I'd love to connect with you because it sounds like you have a lot of interest in this, and we could definitely use your advocacy.
Okay, so now we have some types of barriers.
Okay.
One of which is being stereotyped. And then there's barriers for asking for help. There may be a stigma from family, friends, or church community. If the information gets out, someone may be concerned that this could have a negative impact on their employment or how they are viewed by their leadership/employer. And then we have a lot of people sharing, which is lovely.
That's great.
I think barriers are both internal and external. Sometimes inside the person feels shame and failure, but externally, sometimes well-meaning friends and family have opinions on treatment, natural or traditional. I think both internal and external issues pose difficulties to get treatment. And then we have families' disbelief of mental illness. How can a non-family member help? And not knowing who to contact.
Wow. What great feedback we're getting. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for your comments. Absolutely. So the things that you're mentioning are certainly things that I was prepared to talk about. So I'm really glad that you shared those things. The biggest barrier that people have indeed is stigma. And a lot of what Rachel just shared and a lot of the comments that you were sharing kind of had that thread in them. Stigma, the stigma that the judgment that people are going to be considered less than, either in the workplace or in their family or in their faith community or in their just general community, or as someone was mentioning, that internal stigma, right? So there are actually different kinds of stigma, and I'm not going to take the time to break all those down right now, but that would be a great presentation for the future. There are actually different ways that we experience stigma, but that is truly the primary reason people don't seek treatment. And here's the thing, remember how I said 1 in 5 people lives with a mental illness? And that was pre-pandemic, right? Over half of those individuals do not seek treatment. And there's a likelihood, a very strong likelihood, that stigma is at least part of the reason that they don't seek treatment. But some of those other barriers that were mentioned just now are included here. And I want to address those now. Um, High cost, insufficient coverage, and certainly, while I can't personally address that, it is something that NAMI Delaware advocates for within our state and with our state leadership. And limited options, long wait lines. So one of the silver linings to COVID-19 and the year of 2020 has been telehealth. So if you're not familiar with what telehealth is a way to access mental health treatment remotely. So either by phone or by video. And I can tell you personally that I talk to a therapist regularly, and I have been talking to a therapist for many years now, and it's changed the way I see the world, truly. But my therapist calls me on the phone, and we talk now. I haven't been to her office in months, but that is telehealth at its finest, and it absolutely has changed the way a lot of people have experienced mental health treatment. I can't say it's for everyone, but I will say that there has been a lot of access improvement, and a lot of people who've perhaps been more leery of showing up in a mental health clinician's office are willing to take a phone call. They're willing to do a video chat in their own home, whereas they might not have wanted to go in person. So the telehealth aspect has certainly been an improvement. And I think that we'll see that beyond the pandemic. The telehealth aspect will still be with us. And then someone mentioned this earlier, lack of awareness of resources. And really, I'm going to tie in the lack of information, because you all were mentioning too, like, what if someone doesn't know and doesn't support the idea of mental health problems being real? So I can tell you from a personal perspective that I had family members who didn't believe that my family was impacted by a mental illness. I was told by a number of people that my son's condition was really, he was just being a surly teenager. I have to tell you that that was a lack of information. It was not meant to be harmful, but it was in fact harmful. And over time, those family members and friends have learned that it is in fact a real condition. And they've learned over time gradually, but certainly because I've learned. So what I would recommend, those of you who might be experiencing that stigma within your social circle, within your family or your friends, it's a lack of information that drives a lot of that stigma. So if you can find ways to become informed yourself and then to gently, reassuringly inform others of the realities of mental health conditions, that can help break that down. And I can tell you, for in my personal situation, it has improved greatly. And those of us in my life, my family, my friends, they understand, and they absolutely have changed their mindset too, because of the experiences we've had and because we've been willing to share our story. So that would be another piece of this too. And then to conclude this little section, I would say being connected to resources is critical. Having access, knowing where to go. Um, our earlier comment from Bridget talking about, I think you were talking about crisis services. So there are crisis services, and I'm not going to tell you that they're perfect, but I will tell you that we work hard every day to advocate on behalf of families and individuals who might need more services or might feel let down by um, by any sort of crisis response situation. So please connect with us if you need support, but please also use the crisis resources that are available and contact them if they don't work out, or contact us if they don't work out, because we can help improve the system only if people are using the system. Now, as far as resources, I want you to know that NAMI Delaware has a website that has a great number of resources. I'm going to open up one of the windows here. This is from NAMI Delaware's website. We have mental health and addiction crisis resources. I do want to note that NAMI Delaware is not a crisis response agency. We operate a helpline that you can call Monday through Friday. However, we do not respond to crises. Crisis Intervention Services is an agency that responds to crises. And that's just an example, but there are several resources listed here. Another resource I wanted to bring your attention to is Help Is Here Delaware. Help Is Here Delaware addresses mental health and addiction challenges and services and treatment options, healthcare providers, a vast array of options here that I would recommend that you check out. And nationally, there are resources. Nationally, you can find things like, let me show you the Mental Health America website. This is a list of screeners. Actually, no, this is their, pardon me, I clicked the wrong thing. This one, Mental Health America has a variety of different things, but this is their page that has screeners. Now, it is not meant to diagnose yourself. I do not recommend that you take one of these screeners and tell everyone that you now have a diagnosis. That is not the goal. But the goal is, if you're wondering if the impacts that you're feeling and the symptoms that you're feeling are intense enough that you might need to reach out to someone, this might help you determine that. So Mental Health America is a national agency, much like NAMI, and these screeners are designed for you to help determine next steps. They're not, like I said, they're not designed for you to diagnose yourself. Very much like what is that, WebMD or whatever. You can look on WebMD and decide that you have like every possible disease that affects your body, but don't do that. That service is available for you to help narrow down concerns so that you follow up with a health provider. Another national resource I'd like to draw your attention to is NAMI's fact sheets. NAMI National, this is their website. But if you're curious about warning signs and symptoms of mental illness, you can find them here. And if you're curious about particular conditions, you can actually learn about different conditions by visiting this website and reading through, and there's a lot of them. So you can absolutely become informed. And when people become informed, they have less judgment and they absolutely can address those concerns more successfully. And finally, we have some resources for self-care. I'd like to show you this one. This is an article that actually just gathered some of the best self-care apps. Now, apps aren't for everybody. But if you like using apps, this might be a good place to go to review some of the self-care apps that are available for your phone. Gratitude journal, something about confidence. This is self-care app for journaling. There's something about your diet and your sleep. So lots of different things here available. And I believe that these resources will be available to you through either the landing page through this wellness summit, I believe. And one other thing I wanted to share with you would be it's not that one, sorry, this one. The NIH has developed an emotional wellness toolkit. And there are basically 6 strategies. And so they're basically things I was talking about. But I like the way that they've put this together. You can kind of review these 6 general strategies and you can kind of address them like a card. So you can flip the card. It gives you some suggestions. And then if you want to read more, you just click read more and there's a whole article that addresses whatever that is. So hopefully these resources will be helpful. There's an example, coping with caregiving. So lots of resources available, and I'm happy to connect with you if you have any other questions. But that pretty much concludes my session with you today, and I'd just like to open up to any follow-up questions that you might have. I'm happy to take those.
Okay, so we have a few.
Okay.
One came a little bit earlier, and it's, should we discuss self-care openly with our kids so they learn about the importance and don't feel neglected when we are taking care of ourselves? What are other ways that we can include our children in our self-care strategies?
Wonderful. I'm so glad you asked that. So I do a lot of outreach with educators. Since my background is in education, it feels quite natural to do that. And one of the things I talk about with educators is to model self-care for your students. So in the same way that I recommend educators modeling self-care for their students, parents should be modeling it for their children. And absolutely practicing self-care and looking at wellness in a way that it's fun. Look at that, obviously the 8 dimensions of wellness, some of those might not apply. So occupation and financial might not apply for your children, but a lot of those things do. And you can all go together and go to the park and you can talk to them about, you know what, I'm taking a break from work right now. Normally at this time I'm working, but I'm taking a half an hour to go for a walk with you. And you know why? Because it makes me feel better. It's good for my body and it's good for your body. So those kinds of things we can be doing and talking about. And really, you know what that's going to do? That's going to, and I don't like this word, but normalize. I think of normal as a setting on a dryer, but to normalize our conversations around our feelings and around those things that are invisible, right? If we have a sore throat, we know we have a sore throat and we know there are things we can do to resolve that sore throat. We can drink some hot tea, we can have a cough drop. We don't know as much about our mental health. But if we can teach our kids that the things that we're doing to take care of our bodies and our minds will help us stay healthy, that's modeling self-care, and it can be a family event. I highly recommend that.
Great. Okay, we have a question about, let's see, I have great respect for Delaware NAMI. Are there telehealth opportunities for group therapy, telehealth groups that eventually clients can join? So before you answer, I'm just going to really quick say that JFS Delaware has a
That's what
lot
I was going to
of,
say, Rachel. I was
thank
right
you.
there with you. So let me clarify. So NAMI Delaware does not provide direct service. We provide support services, so support groups, and we provide education programs, so programs that people can go and, well, virtually now, and learn about specific aspects of mental health conditions, either for caregivers or for general community. But we don't provide direct service in that way. Our support groups are for people who either identify as family caregivers or family and loved ones, or they identify as peers. And those support groups are not looked at as therapy. They are instead led by trained volunteers who have lived experience, who can share strategies around those experiences they've had. So our family and loved ones, family support group, I should say, is operated by trained volunteers who identify as family members of someone with a mental illness, if that makes sense. But JFS, however, does do direct service, and that would be your go-to agency when it comes to mental health services, direct service.
Great. So then we have a question. Are you familiar with the app named The Mighty? And
I am.
recommend.
Actually, that, I don't know if you saw on my slide, that was one of my national resources. And just for sake of time, I didn't click on it, but The Mighty is great. Definitely check out The Mighty. The other one that I would recommend in that same kind of realm is Healthy Place. I think it's Healthy Place. Yes. But The Mighty is kind of a group, and it's outside, it's not just mental health, it's all health. And it allows people who have lived experience to share their experiences to help normalize their experiences, to give other people hope and information and inspiration. And I recommend The Mighty. It's great.
Okay. So I think we're going to wrap up now. There's a few more questions and some comments just saying how wonderful you were, Annie, and we
Oh,
appreciate that. But I'm just going to wrap it up and say thank you so much, Annie, for your time and expertise. And thank you, participants. Please come back and join us for other wellness sessions, and feel free to contact us with feedback or to get further information or answers to the questions we could not get to today. All of this will be posted on our landing page, siegeljcc.org/wellness. Coming up next, we have yoga at 10:30 with Mayrav Narunsky and coping with uncertainty and navigating change with Dr. Andrew Feinberg at 2 o'clock. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful day.